Thank you for tuning in for this edition of Justice Watch with Attorney Zulu Ali. I am Attorney Zulu Ali with the Justice Watch crew, Rosa Nunez, Michael Bilal Clark, Dr. Kil Bashir, and Andrea Rodeman. This week, like every week, we'll be discussing critical legal and social justice issues that are impacting our community. This week, our topic is the N-word, a term of endearment or self-hatred. And today joining us is a very special guest, Inglewood and South Los Angeles native Norman Coulter Jr. He is a former competitive basketball player turned author, educator, and transformation facilitator. At 8 years old, he began a life-changing 900 days of being bused from his home to wealthy suburban schools 1.5 hours away. This experience introduced Norman to the effects of racial, political, and socioeconomic conflict. His unique blend of experiences through K through 12 education, college basketball, journalism, theological training, and leadership studies provided even more depth of understanding as a result. He built a career using his six-man philosophy to facilitate transformation. His end game has always been to see love and compassion realized in the individual for the sake of self and others. And I also want to plug a couple of things out here, a couple of books that you wrote, and they're must-reads. The first one, of course, is I know this has been out for a while, but it's called The Sixth Man, 12 Lessons I've Learned from Not Playing Basketball, which I know this is available on Amazon because that's where I got my copy.
Yeah.
And I was blessed with another copy today of your most recent release, which is Bloods, Crips, and Starships, How I Learned to Lead Self in a Black and White Country.
Yeah.
So, yeah, brother, I really appreciate you being with us today and blessing us with your presence on this topic.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thanks for having me on. It's a bucket list. So, I can go on with life now.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the N-word,
Yes.
right? And so I know that, we had a couple of, had a conversation some time ago about the use of the N-word. I know that yourself, you're an educator, so I know that you spend a lot of time with young people. And I know one of the things that we talked about before we went on the air was the fact that, there's a generational issue, I think, of how that word impacts different people. Right.
Yeah.
So obviously at least from my perspective, I feel like people from my generation are going to be a lot more hesitant and reluctant to use the word. And at least from my perspective, I know that we had what, we considered that era maybe in the early 90s where we actually, one of my favorite groups actually, that was their name, NWA, right?
Right. Yeah,
so
it's in the name.
Yeah, it's actually in the name itself. So, and then I know that, you have, I think you said that you hear actually not only the word coming from individuals within our community, but we're also finding that, it's okay. At least there are people that are allowing people outside of the community to use the word as well.
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, I know that, you hear that on campus, and I know that, I'm curious as to your take on, number one, kids in our communities making, using the word, as well as, people outside of the community that are using the word.
Right. So, and when you say community, I'm assuming you mean the Black community.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, it's a prevalent, obviously it's always had a prevalence, in my opinion, in the Black community. I grew up, like I think everybody sitting at this table, pretty much the same era, so I was 70s baby raised in the 80s, so to speak. And so we post-civil rights, era, if you will. And there's a lot of documented research on kind of how we process our reality, coming out of the heart of the civil rights movement era and moving into an era where, we had Vietnam veterans coming back and our communities being ravaged by crack cocaine and things of that nature, right? So LA was a really different, at least that's my native space. And, the inner cities became kind of this interesting thing to make sense of, I think, for young brothers growing up and sisters and brothers, in the community. But I feel like now, first of all, my take on what I'm seeing is that the casual usage of the N word is still alive and well, right? The difference is that I think because I work in an area that's not urban, I work in a suburb. So you have this casual usage, but in mixed company. And I think that was something that was that's foreign to me because growing up, I was bused to school and I was in mixed company a lot from 4th grade to 8th grade, and I write in a book about that. But that was a no-no. You know what I mean? Like my generation, we were taught this is not something, because you're given, we were kind of taught that you're given permission to people outside the community to kind of, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, hide in plain sight.
Right.
Because you don't know what the intent is when somebody says it, and they can be something other than that. So if you call me that, the idea was that, well, if I'm one, you're one.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even the way it was used and the way it's used now, I still see a high fraternal usage of it, right? And I think even when non-black people outside the black community use the term, they're attempting to be fraternal more often than not. I mean, I see it in text messages. I see kids will show me screenshots when they quote unquote beefing with each other. I saw 2 best friends got in a fight fairly recently, and I have a relationship with these boys, so I said, hey, what's going on? Because 2 of them got suspended, and there was a kid in the middle, and I said, hey man, talk to me. He's like, man, I'm trying to mediate, and this is what he's saying, and they were both using the N word, and neither one of those boys were black, right? And I knew that the space they were in was, this is just, they were fired up, and they were still upset, and they were kind of coming at each other, and it was casual. It was almost benign, They weren't using the term with hard R's and trying to like damn each other with the term. It was just a means to communicating like I guess an aggressive tone. If you will. It was literally a means to tonality. Yeah. And I was like, I understood that. Like it wasn't that I didn't understand that, but my take on it is that it's created a lot of confusion because we're also in a time in this country, and I think when you're in mixed company, you're often in the space of people who look pejoratively upon African Americans.
Right.
So whenever there's a tool in play that can be like amorphous, you know what I'm saying? I can make it mean what I want it to mean.
Exactly.
Right? And then I can disavow it conveniently. When you take me to task on it, you say like, first thing people say is, well, they're using it.
Yeah.
It's ubiquitous. How do you know that I'm using it in a way that's derogatory? So my take is that right now we're in a state of a lot of ignorance because there's not a lot of education about the history of the word.
Right.
And it's still just as prevalent as ever, but it's wild out there right now with that word, because I'd say, and it's so mainstream too.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
it's crazy. I mean, when you think about how the history of the word and thinking that, I mean, of course it really comes from a Spanish meaning, right? I mean, of course they changed the way that it's actually, from the term being black, or the word the way they use it in Spanish, but and then obviously we see how it was used during this during the period of slavery, obviously, and the Jim Crow era. And I remember as a kid watching Roots when I was in elementary school, and it was Roots Week, right? And I remember watching it and seeing how they used it, and when they were beating, every time I think about when they were beating Kunta Kinte and trying to get him to say, the word,
trying to get him to adopt his new name. So
yeah, and then when he said it, then he called him a good, that's a good end, right? And and I remember that I got into a couple of fights that week, right? In school. With a couple of kids that happened to be white kids that had used it that week, right? And I know from time to time I would watch Roots, and I would say this is Roots Week, so I'd have to take off from going to work because I didn't want to hear all that. Once I heard that word, so often I would get upset and get mad about it. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's in a joking way I'm saying that, but seriously, I feel that and I know that you have a generation of people who may not understand the history as much as we do, and see it more see it more of a way to like giving it power. Like, are we giving the word power by using that, by making such a big deal out of it?
Uh,
Some
Yeah.
people see it from that perspective.
right. Like that. Do you mean like giving attention to
The word itself,
word
like in
itself?
other words, when we get upset when people use the word, does that give the word power
I think that
that it doesn't deserve?
I don't.
Now, I'm not advocating one way or
I'm
another.
not.
I'm just
Yeah,
playing
because
devil's
I
advocate.
mean,
But I'm curious. That's one of the arguments that you have. The younger generation, I was actually watching a video where some younger people were talking about the use of the word and the fact that if somebody else, they're not bothered by it because that gives the word power when someone says it, and your reaction
okay.
gives it power. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So you get that perspective.
I don't think though the usage of words necessarily are the only things that give the word power. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Certain things, like there are certain words in the English vocabulary or lexicon that no matter how infrequent they're said, when they are said, like you take the C word, you're referring to like a woman's genitalia, and nobody says it anymore. Four-letter C word, right? And no matter how rare that word is in usage, it's still, when it is mentioned, it's now something that's kind of like considered it's taboo and it's considered vulgar.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think with the problem with the N word to me, especially in an educational space, is that it is avoided because I think a lot of people don't know what to do with it, particularly people who are not in the black community. So when we talk about saying educating people on it and understanding the origins that go back to the 16th century, of using it in a way that was really synonymous with referring to somebody who was darker, like fellow or somebody like that. It really didn't take on. It was the slave era, obviously, that precipitated this derogatory usage that spilled into the Jim Crow era of the 20th century, and then you get into these other kind of phases of the word later in the 20th century where now it's kind of considered unsayable, and yet people are still saying it all over the place.
Right.
But I don't think that's what gives it power. I think the ignorance of surrounding it is what's giving it power, if you will. I think that when you don't understand like the origin of a word or the implications, like you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, but as a teacher, I understand the deficit of black history, for instance, right? Most students still don't know about Emmett Till,
Right.
really don't. And there was a movie this year, right? A movie dropped last year. And I'm having to do a lot of historical work, even though I'm not a history teacher, because there are elements of American history that are still excised. And the history of this word is one of them. And my thing is like, if it's going to be in play, because you're not putting that toothpaste back in the tube at this point, in my opinion, then you need to offer a proper education so people understand that this term it bled into media. It was in cartoon. It was like it was suggested in cartoons. It was in books like Gone with the Wind, which became a movie. But black people had to petition and demand that word not be used in the movie because it was all over the book. And it was being used. It was synonymous with black person. It was like to refer to a black person was to refer to them as an N-word, and to understand the power of that degradation, and to diminish men. Used to treat a man like he wasn't a man.
Right.
And we're the protectors of community. So like it was aimed at disempowering.
Yeah.
But I don't think the mentioning of the word is what gives it power. I think the ignorance surrounding it.
Yeah. And I think that the great majority of individuals that actually still utilize that word is individuals that, I want to say millennials, the younger generation. I mean, we heard it coming up, of course, but it goes back down to the ignorance of it, no education behind it, in terms of individuals not actually knowing its root and how much pain that it caused when it was said. And I think that the individuals that use it now just adopt it because it's just a thing to say. And then it's also the context that it's used in. Like you say, it could be used in casual conversation. It could being used as some people as a form of endearment, and then it can be used in terms of something real derogatory. People use it. I've heard people use it in all different phases. When you get angry, people use it. And they use it. I mean, constantly use it. And then some people might walk up and say, "Hey, my end," and in terms of endearment. And then those individuals that's from a particular a different race that might use it. I've heard that as well, and they use it in casual conversations, like it's their normal conversation, their normal speech, and it's like inbred into them in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, is that something we should do? I mean, from an outsider looking in, would that seem irrational? So, and what I mean by that is, if you take this word and if I'm saying, okay, this is clearly a word that has a very nasty history, in this country. I mean, it was used in a very negative way, and it has very negative meanings, and that's the reason why they use the word, right, to refer to us in a very negative way. And then, you have this rationale of utilizing the word in a context that's saying, it depends on how you say it.
Right.
Right. Sometimes it's a term of endearment. I know what you're saying, because I'm just saying that's the rationale. I mean, that's the reality of it.
That's the reality.
That we have certain settings where we think that the term is, but I think to some degree, when we explain it that way, it almost seems like there's a hidden psychosis behind us saying that we're going to use it. You can't use this word, but we gonna use it. You can't. We are saying things like, okay, that's the one thing we got. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get that, because I feel like it words don't stand alone. It's kind of like when you think culturally about a group of people, you do think of their customs, you think of their holidays, or religiously, you think of Christianity, Islam, major religions, and you might know a little bit of what comes with that territory. And I feel like with this word, what happens is that it doesn't stand alone. It comes with this kind of, I know growing up, and I'll speak, this is just personal, I wouldn't try to speak for other brothers or black men, but because I got bused to school, I lived in South Central, but I got bused, pretty far away to school every day.
Right.
And I was among white kids. And so I'd code switch, and I had, they didn't understand the way we talked in the neighborhood. Exactly. So I had to, dress it up, or else I was going to spend all day getting chastised and people telling me I didn't talk right. So, so I started developing this kind of middle ground language. But in the neighborhood, a lot of times I still sounded too proper.
Yeah.
And so it'd be like, oh, you think you white or something? And it was like, so usage of the N-word meant you were down. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it was like this understood that talking this way, that was my slang. I'm not, that it really was. I mean, I'm speaking, I used it profusely.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it became native speak, but it wasn't just by itself. It was like, I felt like it was native to us.
Right.
It was associated with being from the hood. You know what I mean? So then when I started seeing people, as I got older and became an educator, and I was at the settings where people weren't from where I was from and they were using it, I don't know. I think I even questioned sometimes black kids who weren't from where I was from, and they were like trying too hard.
Right.
And they saying it all the time. And then it was people who weren't black. And I'm not saying I had a right perspective about it,
Right.
but I think that it just got really muddy really quickly. And I started seeing people use it almost as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
It was like, well, I listen to rap, so I'm going to do this, that, and the other. And I was like, well, and I kind of feel like we're still there because I'm around these kids all the time.
Yeah.
It is used as a, and so, that's kind of where, like if you look at, and I'm going to use this like the Jewish community, and you think about all the negative words that are used against Jewish people. I mean, they would never call each other those negative words as
No.
as a term of endearment. Or maybe some of the other, other ethnic groups that have went through certain types of experiences, that would be offensive to call each other that type of, that name.
Yeah.
So I do believe that on one hand, I would being devil's advocate on both sides. I guess this is not necessarily devil's advocate, but I would make the argument that a lot of it is deeply entrenched with the psychosis that we still experience from what we've had to go through, in this country in certain ways.
Is that where you kind of bring it into the self-hate space a little
Yes.
bit? But it's kind of unknown by
Right.
the users of the term.
Yeah, I do that, and we have a huge issue with self-hate in our community.
I would agree.
You know what I mean? And the way, I mean, it like a big problem.
A very big problem.
Of the way that we treat each other and we see each other, and I can just, especially the way I see it. I think all of us who work in a professional space, right? I think we see it in a way that's disturbing. The way that we oftentimes are treated by our own people, and oftentimes, you are your worth and who you are, your intelligence is more oftentimes questioned by your own people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so, and I think that sometimes that word is in a way reflective. So it can be reflective of how we sometimes feel about it ourselves.
Well, I think it's funny you say that because, I mean, there's the N word and then there's the R on the front of it.
Yeah.
Like I'm a real, you know what I'm saying? And I think like we all know what that means when somebody's like, yo, I'm a RN.
Yeah.
You like, yeah, me too. And there's a part of you. I think if you're in the black community, there's a part of us that, we kind of laugh about it, but it might even be hard to explain, but we know what it means. It's like, it's like no matter how much education I have, you ain't gonna test me. Don't what is the term we use? You might say, hey, don't sleep just because I have a degree don't mean I can't. You know what I mean? We feel the need to posture.
Right.
And I do that. See,
don't let the soup fool.
don't let the soup fool you, or the smooth taste.
Right.
Exactly. And those associations kind of like I feel like encapsulate this kind of hyper violent, stuff that's kind of in us deep down. And we have a lot of reasons for it. Obviously, the history of this country. When your power historically has been taken from you. I know that was a primary like value as a man. I was for good or for bad, I was masculinized into power. This idea that forcible, what we call right-handed power, was a way for me to demand or command respect, and being an RN was part of that.
Right.
And yet
right.
I watched a lot of RNs get put down, and I stood over some caskets. So.
Yeah.
I think it's even the way it's termed. Like you can't take an individual that used it with the A at the end of it, and he turned back around and put the ER on it. Person would get offended because of that, because they saying it's two different.
Right.
There's two different meanings of it. And you can take the same individual that used it with the A on it every day, and his partner might be from a different race, and if he put that ER on it, then it's going to be offensive to it. He can put the A on it all day, but if he put the ER on it, it's offensive to him.
Wow.
There's two different terminologies. But also look at it like this.
You think there's actually two different terminologies?
No, there's not two different terminologies, but it's just the way that they're interpreted.
Okay.
It's just a perception. Exactly. But
It feels different though.
Huh?
It feels different though, because think about it. I think because culturally how A or AH at the end is used amongst our culture, even though I don't like the word, I don't like to be referred to as that period, but for me, and I kind of grew up in the same situation you did. I was bused to school. I was always the only turd in the snow. So I had to code switch and stuff like that, but I felt I was less offended if somebody said, hey, N with an A, or than I would be when someone put that ER at the end. It hurt different. It felt different.
Yeah.
So but I'm probably the wrong one because I'm very hypocritical when it comes to this work.
But
because I
why?
do say it, but I usually say it in a derogatory way out of anger.
Yeah.
That's
But my
interesting.
thing is, why is this so socially acceptable? Because it's put in music and everything else.
Right.
Then if I said something, because every race has a derogatory name that someone uses, whether it be
Yeah.
white, whether it be Mexican American, people have these derogatory terms that they use for these individuals. But now, how could I walk up to a person and use that same terminology, right? And
Mhm.
said that, like a white person, if I walk up and say, hey, that's my C.
Yeah.
We all know what C mean, but what my
Mhm.
C is going to be perceived
No,
something
what's that?
totally. It's going to be perceived totally different, right?
Right.
It's like a saltine.
Yeah.
Like a
Oh,
saltine.
oh,
Yeah.
oh,
So
okay.
okay, let me just put it like that.
Right.
Okay. A saltine, but it would be perceived totally different. And if we use those type of terminologies inside of music, it would be banned, right? Or it would be frowned upon. But why is it so acceptable for us to put it in the music and it's accepted by us?
Well, I think it
Yeah.
speaks to that ownership that Brother Zulu was talking about earlier. As like when you own it, it becomes proprietary, And I think that we very much feel like, gosh, I'd be careful speaking for everybody, but I think the reason NWA, for instance, were brash enough to actually put it in the title of their group, because they were like, nah, we just gonna, how you beat people, you beat somebody to the punch, like you, it's kind of like, well, they already call us that, so okay, so we that with attitude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And don't test us. And so you had a lot of, in that gangster rap era that came out of, the late 80s, early 90s, what you saw was this kind of like, that's cool, don't come to the hood then. You know what I mean? It was like, it's not your space anyway.
Correct.
And I think that what I'm seeing now is kind of the offshoot, because now the kids in high school now are our children. And I saw this recently. There was the BSU was going to take a picture. That's a Black Student Union. And all these boys showed up to take the picture, and even their friends, but they happen to be non-black. They were drawing a distinct line. They were like, "You can't be in the picture because you're not black." And I'm like, now I'm a teacher. I'm the advisor for the BSU, so I was like, no, we're not doing that. But everything was happening so fast, and I was watching this mass kind of attitude that was like, basically, we're the real RNs, and if you too light skinned, you're not a real RN, and if you're biracial, I mean, they were just really going at each other, and it wasn't like they wanted to fight.
Yeah.
They just felt this need to take that word and kind of like establish this dominance, if you will,
Wow.
through it. And I was
Yeah.
like, wow, you guys are using this word as a conduit into identity, and I'm not sure I understand that, because you guys are actually pretty remote from it. And some of them were foster youth, and that's this whole other bag of worms.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think belonging is a big part of this. And I think if you feel like for me, it was basketball. So I was able to play college basketball and all that stuff. And I remember having good grades, but not caring about that, because that wasn't the currency that's spent in my neighborhood. If you couldn't hoop and you couldn't run a kickoff back, and then you could have been good in any other sport. You could have been good at tennis. Nobody cared about tennis where I was at. You know what I mean? So it was like the N word was part of that.
Yeah.
It was connected to these young black people in my neighborhood really striving for some type of significance. And if you have to get that significance by saying, this mine, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Then they rock like that now. It's just interesting to me that, and to me, it's like this real myopic view of who they could be. And I think that's kind of what part of the problem is right now,
Yeah.
if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there is that. I mean, this whole idea of this psychological slavery, I think that we deal with, and this this issue and this crisis that we have in the community when it comes, because the biggest issue that we really have in our own in our community has to do with ourselves and the way we treat each other, right? I mean, and I think that word in many ways may symbolize that psychosis and how it continues to because why would you say that's what you are? I mean, why would someone, if I called you that word, right? And I think you are the king, and I think you a king. I'm talking about, being kings and being queens and being all these things, but I'm going to call you a word that is derogatory, that has a derogatory meaning, because that's not who you are. That's not what you are. Why would you be cool with that? And why would I be cool calling you that? You see what I'm saying? And if I'm cool calling you that, then we got some work to do.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? You know, and so I mean, I think that's the perspective. That's a way of looking at it, because I think it's deeper than that. I think that when we get into the rationalization of using the word like the GA and the ER, and I mean, would I be cool with my kids saying that to each other? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah.
Do I want to raise my children to think that it's cool? What am I going to tell my son or my daughter or my grandson or my granddaughter about the word? Am I going to set them down and say, you know what? It depends on whether they use a GA or ER at the end of it. You see what I'm saying? I mean, so in other words, at some point in time, it's we're trying to rationalize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we're always trying to say, like Chris Rock when he did his special, like he says there's a difference between the two. Or like when I go, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that, and this is just true of language, man. We all know that there's words evolve, and I've had to accept that there's been an evolution of like how this word is conceived that allows kids to do what they do now. I've been places where I've looked at black kids, and as somebody white is using that term, just basketball court, they're just hanging out, and I said, "Hey, man," he was like, "It's crazy out here," I was like, and I could tell to him it wasn't like this lightning rod flashpoint for him, but it was also, again, here's a kid who I don't think understood fully the gravity of the term. And I know, like, for me, I have a son, and do I want him using that term casually? No. I mean, he's going on 9, and I've never heard him use that word. I probably don't use it in front of him very often, but I have used the word in his presence. You know what I mean? Is old habits die hard. I don't use the word in mixed company, and I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just saying, it was part of my speak. So there's that. But you're bringing up something that makes me think about just honestly the duplicity, because I'm like, here I am, like, I don't want my son to be comfortable using that. I also don't want him to be shook about it, though. You know what I mean? I don't want him to be, I don't want him to be shocked. Like some people have such a, I guess, reaction to the term. And sometimes I wonder if that's also what gives it some of that power you were talking about. Like it's like, I understand the obscenity to a degree, but again, I think the conscience of America has always been my focal point. A conscience that allowed a term to become representative of contempt, to the extent that at times when I've talked to people who weren't black, I could tell that I've always felt like kind of nobody really wants to be black, to be quite honest, with all that comes with it. And I know that's a loaded thing to say, but I think that being an N or when you talk about this word, it's associated with this contempt factor. And that's the thing that I didn't really examine when I was younger, and I'm just asking, this is why I'm so I've tried to propose these kinds of things on campuses, like we need to educate, because when you see it inscribed on a mirror, or you see it hate language that appears, a swastika or some derogatory term, it's in the bloodstream, and that's a conscionable issue. So you have to bring into the greater discourse, are we going to assume that there aren't people who look at, say, black people and associate this term with the worst iteration of it, because we know it's going to exist out there in this other space, but I think what I see a lot of times is people acting as if that's passé now. There aren't people who, whatever letters are on the end of it, that there aren't people who actually mean it as if to say, here's the line of humanity, black people are below it. There is plenty of that ethos in America still, and I think I try to put my energy into us understanding that supremacy component, and how it affects.
I mean, I think that sometimes, do you think that it's reflective of a degree of of dysfunction. So in other words, I hate to keep going back and kind of comparing, you know, how it relates to someone else. But I mean, let's just say, for example, let's just that there's a negative term that's very often used in the Jewish community that starts with a K, right? Now, if I was to sit on this show and I called you that word, or I called you that word, and I say it's a term of endearment,
Oh, no.
Joe, we'd have to, huh? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's a
Oh,
wrap.
that's crazy.
Yeah.
It's over, man.
Cancel culture.
Kanye.
Cancel
It's a
culture.
Kanye
Correct.
situation.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
Instantly.
so that and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. Nor would I feel comfortable saying something of any other type of racial word. And so so yeah, I mean, have I used the word? Of course, I'm not gonna sit up here and act like I'm holier than thou and I don't use the word. But I'm checking myself.
Right.
You know what I mean? I'm really
Examining.
checking myself
Sure.
because
Right.
I think that sometimes we get caught up and sometimes, I mean, I do believe that, because I see it every day in my work, both as a professional and a business owner, and some of the worst treatment that I get on a professional level and as a business owner are by people who look like me, right? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I
Like
think-
really bad.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
like I
what is
cannot
that?
believe.
Yeah, and I mean, what is the root of that? I mean, because I feel like I understand where that's coming from. Oftentimes, almost as if they look at you like you're not a real attorney or something. But
Well, I mean, I
like,
just
what-
think
what
that.
is it? What-
Well, I just think that it's not like they don't think that I'm a real attorney. I just think that, they will say things to you and do things to you that somebody else would not do. In other words, they would be. You would expect them to not be disrespectful. So, for example, if or they expect you to do things for them at a different price, or they
Exactly.
expect you to do.
Yeah.
yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or
So
they're
just too comfortable, you mean? Like,
well, yeah. I mean, I think that, like, for example, if you go to, yeah, I mean, they just there's just that lack of respect
Yeah.
that you don't get from other people. Because I mean, you see the comparison.
Yeah.
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 I mean, like even some of the things that we do on a professional level. Like we always tripping with each other. We have comedians beefing with each other.
Yeah.
We have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're a
Yeah.
comedian, you're a grown man, you're beefing with some. I mean, that if you look at YouTube,
Public
there's
figures.
always a beef
Exactly.
over something that's frivolous, and we consistently see, whenever someone has get it to a certain level, we're very quick to question them and to attack them, attack their credibility, and do things. And
When it's
we're
one of
doing
us
that, and it's
to
one
each
of,
other.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At a rate and at a level that we don't see other people doing that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, and I bring it back to just sometimes I don't even know if we consciously realize that we do that, and a lot of it is a lot of it is jealousy and hate.
Well, it is, I think, tokenizing one of the poisonous effects of a society that makes it look like there's only space for one of y'all. You know what I mean?
Right.
When representation is a problem, that can really affect the way I think a group of people see opportunity. You know what I mean? I mean, so you had athletics is a great example because it's a saturation. Everybody wanted to go pro. You know what I mean? Me included. And no matter what options you have, you cut the other dude's throat to get what because your perception is that there's 8 slices of pie, and I got to get mine, and that crabs in a barrel mentality kind of starts to surface, which is mythology, right? I mean, it's a fallacy. First of all, to feel like there's only these 2 or 3 industries that we can operate in, but certainly, I agree. I've always thought of it like this too, like. You might be quicker to fight your brother than fight a stranger.
Oh yeah.
Because your brother gonna have
Yeah.
some mercy on you, but a stranger will wear you out.
But I find it strange that even when we do get in those conflicts, and let's say we far removed from the word itself, right?
Okay.
Even when we get in those conflicts, we find ourselves utilizing that word to refer to individuals, right? And Just give you an example. I'm so far removed from two words, and that's cuz, because I was on the street,
Gotcha.
or the N word, right? To where one day I got so upset to where I used those words. And my son sit back and said, Dad, don't say that. Don't say that. Because he hears it every day in school, but then when he hears it from me, it don't even sound right. It don't even sound right because you're so far removed from the word and you don't utilize it every day. But in no sense, in the sense that you use it in anger, meaning that you use it in a derogatory term because you're using it because of your anger, not in a casual conversation you just use for anger. And I think that sometimes we do resurrect that word from time to time in those moments. Not saying that it's right. Not saying
That
that
it's
it's
like
right.
an emotional
Exactly.
expression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, I still go back to this whole thing of a lot of the issues that we're dealing with. Just imagine if we were to spend as much time trying to build than we do as we do. Like, for example, I mean, where are we focusing? Oftentimes, we focus our attention. You know what I mean? And where, for example, some of the issues that we have, we talk about what's going on in our own community, and how do we really build in our community? So, in other words, if I'm trying to go into the community, like when you said, like sometimes some of the things that we do in our own community may make us look like we're other than black. So if I go in my community and I'm trying to implement something that may seem non-hood, so to speak,
Right.
or non-black, then that I'm going to get some pushback with that.
You are.
But that's what we need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? I mean, in other words, what we need to go into the community and teach, our community is to do things we need a paradigm shift. Because if we don't have a paradigm shift in our community, they're going to continue to do to us what they do to us.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because we're in a position where we need to change our mindset. When you talk about your way out.
Right.
So in other words, there's no reason that, like, let's just say that we're going to give away, and we talked about this before, we're going to give the Lifetime Achievement Award to somebody, right? Who should I give the Lifetime Achievement Award to? A man that goes to work and educates our community and educates young men and women. That's a good father, and he takes care of his family. Or am I going to give it to somebody who sold a gold record, right? He could be a terrible human being, but just because he has, he's a leader in receptions, or he's a leader in yards, or he's a leader in sacks, or he's a leader in tackles, or he sells these records, or he does this. That's who we celebrate.
Exactly.
Right?
We as a community,
As a
I feel
community.
like we tend to celebrate those.
Right. We tend to
Correct.
celebrate those individuals more than we do the people who are in their communities, in our community, that are more valuable than a celebrity. So why is a celebrity given a Lifetime Achievement Award, and we should honor the men who are educators, the men that are doing things positive in the community, right?
Exactly.
But the reason why why aren't you more valuable, and you are more valuable than they are?
Well,
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I would put this as a question, but it might not state it. I mean, I stated it as a question, but desperation in an environment can create a lot of chaos.
Yeah.
And I think that was what, to me, is the signature. I love LA, but I can't get away of the desperation that was surrounding me
Right.
every day. And
Exactly.
so when you picking up caps off the ground on your way to the bus stop, when you getting off of buses because gangsters are fighting in the back, every moment I knew what colors, I knew what not to wear. My grandmother lived
Right.
in a blood neighborhood, and I lived in a Crip neighborhood. I had to change my pants on the bus sometimes. Like, it was, or just wear neutral colors. You were always mindful of these things. That's a survivalist concern. And when
Yeah.
you don't know if you're going to eat tonight, I had a friend whose mom was on PCP, and he was raising himself. If that's prevalent, and this is what epidemics do, right? When there's desperation and social vulnerability, it's difficult for that paradigm shift to occur
Right.
when there's when the examples are in short supply.
Right.
So I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I think that part of that, people got to believe that what you're selling will work. And I think that was the problem. I know for a lot of kids growing up is they were so desperate all the time. They didn't have time to think that education was a viable tool of extrication. You know what I mean? They didn't have they were like, think different, man. I mean, the generation before me was telling me to negotiate and to kind of like talk. I couldn't talk my way out of a scrap if I wasn't mindful enough to keep distance between me and these dudes I saw, and they ended up on me. I couldn't talk my way out of that. I had to actually,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I had to take this L, or I had to try to fight my way out of it because
Exactly.
it was jackals. And this is what, when the man, when the government or whoever powers that be aren't holistically interested in the well-being of a community, when you abandon people and you leave them to desperation, there was no grocery stores where I lived. There was a food desert. You're asking for trouble. People they'll start choosing themselves. They can't be collective, you know.
Yeah.
And it's a divisive tactic that societies historically have always used to divide people. So, like, it's what are those baby steps to get us to the paradigm shift? What do we have to implement? Well, one of the things we have to do, like education, has to be safe for a kid to get to school. And they have to have reinforcement somewhere at home. Even if it's not everybody, they have to have a support system. If that kid is late every day, if that kid nowadays, kids vaping regularly, and you can see kids walking, get a bathroom pass, and they just every period they're gone for 15 minutes at a time. It's the same kids getting suspended. It's the same kids fighting. The boys are twice as many discipline referrals as the girls. Well, what's happening? They don't have purpose. How do we infuse that, right? They have to have a
Right.
conception that they can be successful. And right now in California, I'm 1% of the teachers. So we have our work cut out for us.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that at the it's definitely an issue about values. We talked about that before, man. I mean, I think that in the final analysis, what do we value? And I think that we have an entire generation that unfortunately are valuing things that are dangerous. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they don't matter whatsoever, really.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look back at it, like you say, the people that get the awards is the people that, and not saying they don't need to be recognized, but that's not where the value need to be placed at. The value need to be placed upon those individuals that is the fathers that is trying to do something to better their community and stuff like that. Because when you show that to them, then the individuals know that this is the direction that I want to go down because I want to be able to achieve that award that they achieve. But right now, I want to achieve this award for basketball. I want to achieve this award to the best rapper. I want to achieve the best songwriter, so forth and so on. That's not where like you say, that's not where the value should lie at. And until we change that, can't begin to change too much of nothing else. They need to know exactly where that value at, because once they understand that value, they'll even understand this word. That it's not cool to use it.
No, that's good. That's so true.
And like you say, desperation, and it's like the survival of the fittest. That's why you got the crab in the bucket. I want to be above you. So it's it goes in all different various directions that it go in. I want to be better than you, and so whatever it's going to take for me to become better than you, and that means I got to pull you back down in order for me to get up, then that's exactly what I'm going to do, based on the fact that there's no values.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
yeah, it's a sad. When you think about it, it's
sobering,
sad
man.
reality.
No, it
It
is.
brings you back and say, okay, where's the starting point at?
So true, Brother Bilal, man. Like, I can remember being in college and not partying, not because I was a saint, but just because I felt like this was my shot. You know what I mean? And so some of the students who weren't from the black community were turning up, and they were like, they wanted to show off, so they was drinking 40 ounces. I was like, you drinking 40s, man? Like, you grew up with 40s? Because, like, you know what I mean? We're from, you know, where we from, you know, it was all that, you know, Colt 45 bottles everywhere. But it was a lot of this pretense. It was like they were enamored with the hood because it was like a field trip for them, you know? And I was like, nah, man, I live this, dude. I live this. I don't want no parts of it. You know, it's too close. You know, it was too close to me. And I just think that what you said was so powerful is this conception that I can be more, you know? And I feel like, I don't know, I hate to say it, but I feel like the boys are the ones who are struggling with that the most right now. You know, black boys, you know. So when I see this term being used, for them, it's like an identity. For the non-blacks, it's an option. You know, they can use the term, and it's like for sport. You know, it's like, you know, and I'm cool, and I'm, you know, I mean, I'm not that kind of white dude, man, because, you know, these my boys right here. And I was like, yeah, but for this black child, you know, female or male, if they live in that space where they're using this term all the time, and this is what I think they don't know, because I pull them aside, you know, and I have a lot of sidebars every day. They don't know how they're being seen. You know what I mean? And I'm like, hey, I know this is just what you do. I'm not here to judge you. I always got a universal sign if I'm not judging you. But I'm like, hey, man, you're like, on my campus, 3% is black kids, right? Half that is black boys of the whole campus. So you can typecast yourself real quick. And then violence is something that's foreign to a lot of people, and even just being demonstrative. So you come in and you woofing and you like, you know, you come in like that, and the teacher is not familiar with that that energy. It's frightening.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, most definitely.
And I spent my whole life disarming myself, and I try to explain this to people from other communities. I'm like, I'm palatable only because I read the room, and I knew what it took for you to accept me. And I'm myself, but you know, it's different. So
what's the consensus? We have to trash the word. No.
I think give it. I mean, I think, you know.
Discretion.
Yeah, exactly. Discretion. You know, it goes back to, you know. I mean, I don't use it. I don't like it being used on me, someone referring to me, you know, because I understand the root of it. And I think that I think the great majority of individuals, that's how they interpret it. And that's just how it's going to always be. I hate to say it like that, but I don't think you're going to ever trash the word, because you're going to always have your segment of individuals that's going to utilize that word. And like you say, and I think you said it best when you said words evolve, and I think that's the way they look at it, because when you bring it to them, they'll tell you, no, this don't mean this anymore.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like the culture doesn't exist fully without that word. That word has become a huge part of the culture. And an uncle of mine had said to me, because he uses that word just like, you know, he's much older, but he said, I look at the word the same way I look at the word black. He said, when I grew up, the word black was used derogatory. And we took that word back, you know, and now I say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud, you know. He said, and for me, I did the same thing with the N-word. That word was used derogatory, and I took that word back. But I can use it in whatever way I want to, but that's my word. I have the right to use it, and it's mine.
Yeah.
That's how he views it.
Well, all right. I hate to cut you off, because we get ready to it's over. All right. Well, thank you again, brother, for coming in, man.
Thanks for
I appreciate
having me,
you.
man. This is a real honor.
This book, Blood, Crips, and Starships. Go get it. We'll see you next week,
Amazon.
same time, same place, same channel. Until that time, stay blessed. You said it's on Amazon.
Yeah.
Right.
It's on Amazon.
And we'll talk about it next week too. And I want you to come back and we can just talk about the book itself.
That'd be fun.
All right.
You're listening to the Inland Talk Express, 1050 AM and 106.